At the weekend, it was Spitfire Audio's Make Music Day 2020. To celebrate that, today I will be making a multi-sampled virtual instrument of this toy saxophone. What is a multi-sampled virtual instrument? Basically, it's a sound that you can play on your computer, normally using one of these, a MIDI keyboard. The most simple way to do it is to record one note being played on the instrument in question, and then you set up your computer to play that note back at different pitches as you press keys on your keyboard. This is called sampling, and you can have so much fun. I mean, I sample all kinds of noises and make weird sounds with them, and it's really cool.
Icicle snap.
But if you've sampled a real instrument, as you play notes higher up and lower down from the actual notes that you sampled in the first place, the less it starts to sound like that instrument, because as it squashes or stretches the note, it starts to sound less realistic. This is where multi-sampling comes in. Instead of just recording one of the instrument's notes and stretching that out or squashing it to play it back at different pitches, you can actually take a recording of every note the instrument makes and then play back the correct note for the key that you've played. But there are other layers of complexity as well. Another key one is velocity, which is to do with loudness. When you play a real instrument, the sound you make when you're playing quietly actually has a different character to the sound that you make when you're playing loudly. So you could just record a note and play it back on your computer, setting the volume to be low or high, but that wouldn't reflect the changes in character that you get when you're actually playing a real instrument at different levels. If I play this note softly, it's a different quality to when I play it loud. In fact, it starts to sound a little bit out of tune when I play it really loudly. So if I want my sampled instrument to sound like this, then I'm going to have to capture recordings of me playing it quietly and loudly and everything in between. In fact, I'm going to record 10 different layers of me playing at different velocities from the quietest to the loudest. And I'm going to record each of those 10 layers on each of the notes that the instrument can produce. Now, thankfully, this toy saxophone only has 8 notes, which means I need to record 80 samples to create my virtual instrument. Recording will be a bit tricky because, let's face it, this is a toy. One of the keys has snapped off, so I'm going to have to keep that covered up with a finger whenever I'm recording any of the other notes. But this is going to be fun. Here we go. I'm feeling quite lightheaded after all of that. I noticed all of the different sound qualities of the different notes when I was doing that. One of the notes has got a real rattle to it. Some of the notes sound duller and others sound brighter. As I was blowing really hard, there's just lots of air noise coming through the instrument and out of my mouth. And so those are all the nuances that are going to be picked up by the multi-sampling technique. But I realized that I've been recording long notes, so you can hold them down as long as you want to. But when you play a short note, you get the sound of the note starting and stopping. And that's really nice. So I think what I need to do now is record another 80 samples of short notes. Now I have 160 samples, 8 notes at 10 velocity layers, done as long notes and short notes. Now I need to turn that into a playable instrument. Okay, so I've got all of my samples here. The next thing I need to do is chop them up so I have each individual note as a separate sample. That's going to take a while. Okay, now I've chopped up all my samples. I'm going to add a sampler instrument into this MIDI track. And I'm going to have a separate instrument for the long notes and the short notes, and then later I'll rack them together into a single instrument. So I'm going to start with all of the long notes. I'm going to drag all of them into my sampler. You can see it says there are 81 samples, so there's 80 notes, but I also recorded an extra sample of lots of breath with no note coming out, because that might be useful for something. Now there are some things that I need to do inside Sampler. I need to assign all of those samples to their correct pitch and their correct velocity so that playing a note on the keyboard will trigger the right sample. I need to manage the samples as well to make sure that they all start at the same time, and that if you hold down a note that it will just loop continuously until you release the note. So let's have a look. Here are all the samples I've recorded. Let's start with some velocity. So I'll take this first group. This is velocity layer 1. The complete MIDI velocity range is from 1 to 127. So each velocity layer is going to have a range of about 12. So let's see. There we go. So what I've done here is I've set these samples to be triggered if the incoming note velocity is between 1 and 12. With the next bunch of samples, they're not that easily named. I'm going to set them to be played if the incoming note velocity is between 12 and 24. Going to do the same with the next one. So I've got another velocity layer. Okay, so I now have each velocity layer assigned to its particular range. I extended the ranges a little bit as I got higher up, but at the moment none of the pitches are assigned, so if I play any note it will just play all of the samples at that velocity layer, which actually sounds pretty cool to me. You can hear that they all start at different times as well, so I'm going to have to manually set the start point for each individual sample. Okay, let's set some pitches first. So I'm going to find all of the note Cs. Okay, and I'm going to set their range to be C3. Actually, I'm going to go a little bit further either side. The real instrument can only play 8 notes, which means it can only play in one scale for 1 octave. I'm going to make my virtual instrument slightly wider. I'm going to set it up so that the lowest sample and the highest sample can be used to play sounds that are lower and higher than the instrument can actually play. That's going to involve some stretching, which means it will start to sound less like the real instrument. I also want this virtual instrument to be able to play the sharp and flat notes, the black keys on the keyboard, so that it could be played in any key. So most samples are going to be assigned a range that covers an extra note. So if you play an F or an F sharp, it will use the same sample for both of those. So now every note has been assigned to its correct pitch, plus the range of the instrument has been extended by a fifth on either side. Plus I've assigned the breath sample to the note C2, which means when I press this key, you just get that brilliant breathiness. I still need to go in and edit every sample's start point. This is going to be the most painstaking part of it, so I'll show you what I'm going to do with one sample. This is the quietest, the first velocity layer for the note C. Let's set the start point here. The attack is really nice and soft, and so I want to keep that nice soft attack. I also want the sample to be able to loop infinitely, so I'm going to choose the loop sustain mode and set the loop start and end points. to just somewhere within the body of the note. And now we should see when it gets to the end of this loop section, it's just going to go back to the beginning and carry on playing. So that's one note, 80 more notes to go. Okay, I've done that, so what I've now got is a playable instrument with velocity layers. Another small issue is the fact that this saxophone isn't completely in tune. Sometimes when you're blowing really hard, the note goes out of tune, but I mean, even when you're just playing normally, it's not pitched perfectly. I'll aim to transpose the instrument as a whole so that it fits best with other instruments it might be playing with, but it's still going to sound a little bit fruity, and I think that's just going to add to the character. Now I just have to repeat that entire process for the short notes. Okay, I've made another sampler instrument now with the short samples. This is what it sounds like. Okay, so I have my two separate instruments at the moment, the short notes and the sustains, and I want to combine them to one playable instrument with the option to choose which sound you want. So I'm going to start with an instrument rack in a new track. And I'm going to load in the two sounds I've created, two different sampler patches. So they're both in there. At the moment, if I play, it's going to play both of them. I want to assign this first macro knob to be a selector to choose which one of those two sounds is going to be played. So I'll just open the chain tab. I'll set the first sound to a range of 0 to 63 and the sustains from 64 to 127. Map that range to the first macro. I'll name that articulations, and then if the knob is on this side, it should play our short notes. If I turn it over here, we get the sustains. Now I could say that's it, it's finished. But actually I would love to hear what this sounds like with some effects on it. So what I'm going to do is rack this rack inside another rack. I'm going to map the articulations now to this control panel. I want effects in this instrument that are going to apply to both kinds of sound, and I want to be able to control them all from this panel of macros. So I'm thinking a chorus, some distortion options, and maybe some delay and reverb. So I've now added these effects. You can hear it with some chorus, some overdrive, and delay and reverb. Let's change the articulation for this one. And also I've added a level control here. All that's left for me to do is name this instrument. And there it is, multi-sample toy saxophone. This multi-sampled toy saxophone instrument for Ableton Live is available to buy from my website. If you go to andylow.co, you can download it there.